It was a young. I look at things like it. And so I came to learn that Thoreau was not going to be found at Walden Pond. He was not going to be found on Unoccupied Island. He was not going to be found on the Concord River. He was going to be found in the text. I'm very, very much a text-based person. I love the written word. People assume because they talk about Thoreau all the time that it likes the outdoors. The outdoors would be kind of noticed. It's cold, it's usually wet, and it's dirty. So give me a book. And so I'm going to use Thoreau's words to kind of work my way through this talk and use some quotations. And I will use those quotations to sort of set up different sections of my talk. And then I'm going to do what those of you who have seen me talk before have seen me do, which is ramble. I tend to ramble a lot. Thoreau once said that when he wasn't rambling in the fields of nature, he rambled in the fields of thought and literature, and that's what I plan on doing. So I'm going to start with a quotation. Who knows whence our education is to come? I wish I could do voices, because I don't want to say, here's the Thoreau quotation of Thoreau said all the time. I just put it in a different voice, but I really can't. So I'm not going to do that. So when I was in college, UMass Emerson, I was an English major, and I took that role very seriously. I believed and loved literature that came out of England, out of Britain. I tried to get through 4 years of college without ever reading an American author. I literally abominated American literature in those days. And I did pretty well. The only author I read as part of my college studies in those 4 years, an American author, was Robert Frost. But a friend said I should read some Thoreau. And so I picked up an anthology, Walter Harding's Selected Writings of Thoreau, which I'm sure some of you are quite familiar with. And I picked up Walter's book and started reading the words of Henry David Thoreau for the first time in my life. And it was okay. There was no epiphany. There was no magic moment that ultimately changed my life, from which I never turned back. But I loved the way he put words together. I loved the way he put sentences together and paragraphs, and it just mesmerized me. And so I kept reading him over and over again. I didn't quite grasp what he was talking about at first, but I just loved reading those sentences, to the point that as I read it more and more and more, it started to sink in what he was writing about and talking about. And I realized that what he had to say really kind of resonated with not so much who I was, but who I wanted to be. So I started reading him more and more. And as my interest in Thoreau grew, there were some, like a seminar being taught at the Thoreau Lyceum. I don't know, some of you probably remember the old Thoreau Lyceum. And so I was going to go take the seminar, and I didn't know who the speaker was. It was Tom Blanding. Some of you probably know Tom, friends of Tom. And I didn't really know who Tom was. So I went to the Lyceum, and I was there a few minutes early, and there's Tom standing there. And I went up to him and just pretty much like, who are you? Meaning, what are your credentials? What great, 3-volume work on Thoreau did you write? Or, where do you teach? Or any of those things, just to get his credentials. And Tom looked me straight in the eye, and he said, I'm a Transcendentalist. And I thought, God, I have to get out of here. Got to get my money back. This is not where I want to be. But I stayed, and I listened to Tom. And Tom, for anybody who's taken a course with Tom, Tom's a great teacher. He's kind of brilliant, and he knows how to explain things. And so before that first session was over, I really started thinking that, yeah, maybe I'm a Transcendentalist too. And so I started calling myself a Transcendentalist to myself. It's not something you want to say out loud. Doesn't go over very well. And I'm not sure how many Transcendentalists there really are in the world. Maybe a few in this room, yeah, I can see a couple of hands, but it's something you don't admit too often. It's really the quickest way to kill a dinner conversation, particularly when they find out you're not joking. But It is what it is. Speaking of joking, when you're a public speaker, they always tell you to start off with a joke. And not easy to do when you're talking about transcendentalism. So I searched. I spent a while on the internet trying to find the perfect transcendentalist joke. Nope. So finally I got desperate and I asked Siri. I said, "Hey Siri, please tell me a transcendentalist joke." And she said, "You're kidding." But I am going to tell you a practical joke, because one of the things I love in my studies of Thoreau all these years is that he is a human being, something we tend to forget. We carve our iconic figures in stone. We erect statues to them, and they become these solidified things. And we forget that Henry was real. He was a human being. He had all sorts of things, and one of the things he had was a sense of humor. And so I want to read you from my last book, Solid Seasons, that Victor mentioned, this practical joke he played on Emerson. And took place in 1858. And Emerson had written at that point that he was especially sensible of Thoreau's merits as a surveyor. Because he had just recently surveyed something for Emerson, and he innocently made 60 rods of woodland for him, and left the adjacent lot, which he was measuring, larger than the deed gave it. So Emerson really appreciated Thoreau's ability as a surveyor. So at one point, Thoreau was surveying a border for Sam Staples, who had bought the Kettle farm next to Emerson's home. And Thoreau ran the lines for him and found that a ditch that Staples had dug following the line of Emerson's orchard and meadow was incorrectly located. And although the error was to no one's blame or discredit, Thoreau found it an opportunity to tease his friend. So he said to Sam, "We'll call Emerson down and show it to him." And he said, and Sam Staples said, no, let it be as it is. He said, but Thoreau insisted. He said, "We're going to get Emerson down here." So Thoreau went up to the house, and he got Emerson to follow him down to the property line. And standing on the border of the two properties, Thoreau taunted his friend and said, "I didn't think this of you, Mr. Emerson, stealing so much land of Staples here." And Emerson was troubled, of course, by this dispute, offering right away to buy the land from Staples, who would hear none of it. "I dug the ditch there, supposing that was where the hedge was lined," Staples said. "'Twasn't your fault. 'Twas the man you bought of showed you where to put the hedge. Let it be as the ditch is now." But Thoreau delighted in his joke and the embarrassment he caused Emerson. And Emerson, in his very next book, wrote, "Every man takes care that his neighbor shall not cheat him, but a day comes when he begins to care that he do not cheat his neighbor." But I love the stories that make Thoreau human. We have this manuscript at the Walden Woods Project Library that we bought a couple of years ago. It's a manuscript leaf from his essay or lecture, Moonlight. And on the back of it, he wrote this note to himself. And I found this fascinating. So he wrote on the back of the Moonlight lecture, "If my pages were written in a larger character, I would extinguish these lamps and standing by a window read them by the light of the moon alone." And I love that because we just think they get up, they give these lectures, and they go away. He's thinking of the dramatic effect of, I'm reading a lecture about moonlight, and wouldn't it be amazing if I could actually read it by the moon shining on my paper? So I love those stories because I think it's really important to remember that these are our people. There's the story, which is in a lot of biographies, about he's on his deathbed and he's teasing about what turns a man's hair gray as an explanation to why his friend H.G.O. Blake's hair was so very gray. But I want to get back full circle to back where we came from. So quotation. "Who can doubt that men are by a certain fate what they are, contending with unseen and unmitigated difficulties, are encouraged and aided by equally mysterious, auspicious circumstances?" Fate. Strangely, I am one of those people that has this, I trust the universe. I have this weird sense of fate. I met my wife through fate. Various things have happened in my life. But I want to talk about how I was lucky enough to get the job at the Walden Woods Project Library, which some of you have heard, I'm sure. I worked for the city of Boston at the Boston Public Library for 20-odd years and was very tired of working for the city and wanted to get out and was looking all over for something else and wasn't finding anything. And I was just editing my first book on Thoreau called Thoreau and Freedom, and the editor said you should go out to the Thoreau Institute and get a quotation from the person who worked there. And so we just have a few like lesser known quotations. And I said, sure. So I set up an appointment to go out to the Thoreau Institute. But about a day or two before I went out there, the head of the rare books department in Boston came to see me, and she said, Jeff, you should meet this woman, Susan, we just hired. She used to be the curator at the Thoreau Institute. So sometimes I'm slow, but I picked up on that one right away. So I came out to the Thoreau Institute. I saw the guy. He gave me a disc with some quotations on it, and I said, do you have an opening? And he said, yeah, you interested? So he showed me around, and for those of you who've been in the library of the Walden Woods Project, it's a place you really want to be in if you can work it out. So he said, yeah, we've had a nationwide search. We have not found a candidate that was viable for this position. And I said, I've been doing a nationwide search for a job, and I couldn't find one that was viable. And as it turns out, I am probably literally the only professional librarian who's a Thoreau scholar, so it was pretty lucky that way. But anyway, he said, yeah, write a letter to our executive director, so I did. And got a letter right back saying, yes, please come for an interview. And so similar to Victor's story about saying something stupid, I was going to my interview, and when you want something really bad, you do tend to say something really stupid. And I didn't want that to happen. So I was about 6.5 minutes literally away, and you'll know why I know that in a second. But I decided to hedge my bet. And I said, if I hear the Eagles on the radio, so for those of you who don't know, the Walden Woods Project was founded by Don Henley from the Eagles. And so I said, if I hear the Eagles on the radio, this will be my job. And as soon as I said that, Hotel California started. 6.5 minutes later, it ended as I pulled into the parking space at the Walden Woods Project. It had a gravel parking lot in those days, and the windows were cracked open a little bit so I could breathe. And as I pulled in, the song faded, and you could hear the tires on the gravel, and it was like in a movie, and I got out of that knowing it was going to be my job. So I did still say some pretty stupid things in the interview, but they didn't seem to mind, which is great. So I was after the interview, invited for lunch to discuss things, and I had this T-shirt that says, do not hire a man who does your work for money, but I decided not to wear that to the negotiation meeting. It didn't seem quite appropriate. But the library is a wonderful place to be, and there's this quotation that I found in Thoreau that just seems so appropriate. Thoreau once said, I have sometimes imagined a library, i.e. a collection of the works of true poets, philosophers, naturalists, etc., deposited not in a brick or marble edifice in a crowded and dusty city, guarded by cold-blooded and methodical officials, and preyed on by bookworms in which you own no share, and are not likely to, but rather far away in the depths of a primitive forest. So I feel lucky to be in that library in the depths of a forest. It's an amazing thing to be able to spend your day talking and thinking about Thoreau every day. So I've been really lucky in my career path in that I've gotten to do things that I want to do. Things have worked out very nicely for me in that way. So it's been my fate and my luck to be able to spend my days thinking and talking about Thoreau to people, doing what I'm doing right now, which I love doing. So when I see a group of students that we talk to a lot, when I talk to a group of students and I ask them what they might be planning on doing with their lives, and I get the standard answer that they're going to this or that college with some very specific career at the end of it, and there's usually no sense of joy or pride in their choice. I begin to preach to them a bit. Because there's nothing really so exasperating as seeing a teen with a 50-year career stretching ahead of them that doesn't really excite them. So I talked to them about my favorite Thoreau quotation, which is, "If I am not I, who will be?" I talked to the students a lot of the Thoreauvian idea that we are all extremely unique individuals, that we need to be proud of who we are, we need to boast about who we are, we need to be who we are, and that we all spend so much of our lives, not just talking about students in high school, but as adults, we spend so much of our time in our lives hiding who we are, hiding what we feel, what we believe, and it's not the way to be. We really need to be talking about who we are. So I spend a lot of time on that quotation, "If I am not I, who will be?" And I've often thought that if every school in the country had that quotation emblazoned on the door, overhead of the door of every school in this country, that every student, every single day of their school lives read that, "If I am not I, who will be?" what that would instill in them and how their lives and everybody's lives might change if they thought about that. But I also encourage them to be thinking about the things that make them happy, whether that's making music or carving wood or gardening or being a mechanic or fixing things, whatever it is. And that wouldn't it be absolutely amazing to spend your life doing the thing that gets you excited? And they all go, yeah, that would be really nice, but we need money. We have to make enough money to live and all that. So, but that brings that Thoreauvian question around of like, well, what is enough? And what do we need to live on comfortably? And what would they have? How do they have enough to support a family? And what do they really need? And all these choices that we make along the way, these Thoreauvian kind of choices about how to conduct our lives. And so I tell them about this movie. It's called Ira and Abby. Has anybody seen it? It's not a good movie. Don't go out and rent it. Yeah, you saw it. I know you saw it with me. But not a great movie. But it's your typical romantic comedy. In this case, it's a man and a woman, and they meet under very bizarre circumstances, and they fall in love. And about halfway, or a little bit more than halfway in the movie, someone says something stupid, and they break up. And then 5 minutes before the end of the movie, they get back together, and they live happily ever after. You've seen this in so many movies. So what did Ira and Abby break up over? Ira accused Abby of not having a career. Yeah. So, and Abby's answer to Ira was very Thoreauvian, actually. I don't know if the person who wrote the movie ever read Thoreau or not, but basically what she tells him, I'm not quoting, but basically what she tells him is, I have a job, I have an apartment, I have food to eat, I have clothing on my back, I have friends. What more do I need? So, and I love that because and he came to realize that she was right. She had all the things that she needed to be comfortable in her life, and she got to do the things that made her happy. And that is so brilliant. That is so Thoreauvian. But often when I talk to the students, you don't know if you're reaching them or not. But every so often we get emails from teachers saying, I know they were very quiet, but they really talked about a lot in the bus and what you had to say and what Thoreau had to say. And then a couple of weeks ago, one teacher told me that after we had talked to their students at Walden Pond, one young woman who wanted to be an artist said that she was having a midlife crisis. And I just kind of felt like her midlife crisis was my getting an award. It just felt like such a nice thing to hear. To get back to those Thoreau quotations, there's another one coming around. Here it comes. Will you be a reader, a student merely, or a seer? So this talk is called Thoughts from a Life with Thoreau, but it really should be Thoughts from a Life with Thoreau and that other guy. Because it's hard for me to have any discussion about Thoreau without talking about Emerson. I think it in no way diminishes Thoreau to realize that Emerson influenced him in a lot of ways. And that Thoreau was a master of absorbing what had come before him and turning it into something uniquely his own. And so that Emerson was an influence on Thoreau is as it should be, but that he could adapt those influences and not be overwhelmed by them was the key to his strength and his individuality. And Thoreau does this a lot through most of his life, that there are so many things that he did that we associate with him that are not unique to him, that are things that he found elsewhere or learned elsewhere. But the thing that Thoreau could do was write about it in such a way that they became his. So, we're all familiar with the famous Night in Jail, but Bronson Alcott, Charles Lane, other people were not paying their taxes, were being thrown into the same jail, were being sent away. All the same things that happened to Thoreau were happening to others before him. But we hear about it through Thoreau because of the way he wrote about it. He's not the first person to go build a cabin at a pond. He's not the first person to climb Mount Katahdin. But there's all these things because of the way he turns them into something that you cannot think about them without it being Thoreau. But Thoreau and Emerson, they did not want to create disciples. They wanted to create original thinkers. I mean, Thoreau talks about not wanting people put in his coat and stretch the seams. Emerson explains it this way: I have been writing and speaking what were once called novelties for 25 or 30 years and have not now one disciple. Why? Not that what I said was not true, not that it has not found intelligent receivers, but because it did not go from any wish in me to bring men to me, but to themselves. I delight in driving them from me. This is my boast, that I have no school and no follower. I should account it a measure of the impurity of insight if it did not create independence. Which is a weird thing for me to read as I sit here talking about Thoreau all the time, and how much influence he had over my life. But when I look at how I experienced Thoreau 50 years ago, when I made my trek to Walden Pond because I was going to find Thoreau there, to how I look at it now, it's quite a different way of approaching him. Thoreau said, the question is not, where did the traveler go? What place did he see? It would be difficult to choose between places, but who was the traveler? How did he travel? How genuine an experience did he get? For traveling is, in the main, like as if you stayed at home. And then the question is, how do you live and conduct yourself at home? So now when I look at Thoreau, when I read Thoreau, which in itself is traveling, is a journey, I want to sort of bounce my life off of it and think about what he's doing and what am I doing and how do they relate, and usually it does not end up in my favor. But Edward Abbey, hopefully everybody knows Edward Abbey, the incredibly amazing naturalist and writer. He wrote an essay once called Down the River with Henry Thoreau. And it's a great essay where he's reading his old worn copy of of Walden while he's going down a river in Utah. And Wendell Berry described Edward Abbey's essay this way. He said, "It is an essay in the literal sense, a trial. Mr. Abbey tries himself against Thoreau, and Thoreau against himself. He tries himself and Thoreau against the river. He tries himself and Thoreau and the river against modern times, and vice versa." And this is the value of Thoreau or any great writer, to something to try ourselves against, to learn from, to figure out what they are doing right, if they are doing things right, and how you can make that happen for you. There's an Austrian philosopher named Martin Buber, and at the time of the centennial of Thoreau's death, when all sorts of people were writing all sorts of things about Thoreau because it's the centennial of his death, but Martin Buber, in a very short amount of words, got it absolutely right. And he said, he addressed his reader in such a way that the reader not only discovered why Thoreau acted as he did, but also that the reader, assuming him of course to be honest and dispassionate, would have to act in just such a way whenever the proper occasion arose, provided he was seriously engaged in fulfilling his existence as a human person. I love that. fulfilling your existence as a human person. I mean, that is what we all want to do. What is our purpose as a human person? Why are we here? What are we doing? How can we make it better so that there is a purpose to why we're here? And so I look at Thoreau a lot that way, and try to reflect about what he's saying and what it might mean to me. And so I look at him when he is dying, and he's on his deathbed, and someone asked him about regrets. And Thoreau said, "I suppose that I have not many months to live, but of course I know nothing about it. I may add that I am enjoying existence as much as ever and regret nothing." I take Thoreau at his word. I think he literally meant at that point in time, he regretted nothing about his past. That's not to say he didn't make mistakes, he didn't do things he wished he hadn't done, but I think at the end it was, yep, I regret none of the things that happened along the way. But how many of us can say that? How many of us really can say, I regret nothing? I usually regret things every day. As people who know me well know, I apologize for a lot of things every single day. Global warming, my fault, sorry. All sorts of things are my fault, and I do keep apologizing for them. But I want to get to that point of, like Thoreau, being able to say, okay, I did the best I could possibly do, and I regret nothing. So how do we get there? One of my other favorite and luckily short quotations of Thoreau's is, "Surely joy is the condition of life." And it is. I mean, we're put on this earth for, sadly, a relatively short time, and we should be enjoying ourselves. That's not to say we should ignore the hardship in the world and all the horrors that are going on in the world every day, but we also have to find ways of finding our peace and finding joy within the life we've been given. And in part, it's because Thoreau was full of awe, he was full of joy, and appreciation for what he's been given. He talks a bit about miracles. Miracles in the 19th century and before, as it was taught at the Harvard Divinity School, miracles was something that happened in the biblical past, time of Jesus and Abraham and Moses and all those amazing people. But miracles don't happen now. But Thoreau said the age of miracle is each moment thus returned. Men talk about Bible miracles because there is no miracle in their lives. Thoreau could walk outside and see the miraculous. He could see things, he could feel things, and all of that was a miracle. Their friend Thomas Carlyle, the Scottish writer, said, "The God-revealing miracle lies in this, that I can stretch forth my hand." And if you ever do that, if you ever stop for just a second and stretch forth your hand and wiggle your fingers, and then stop to think the millions of years of evolution that had to happen for you to be able to do that, and if you stop and think for a minute of all the amazing things that are happening in your body at all at the same time to make you do that, that's a miracle. Thoreau said, "I am in awe of my own body." I mean, who wouldn't be? So for Thoreau, who is a deeply spiritual person, he didn't believe in formalized religion, but he was very spiritual and believed in God. We have been given this amazing earth to experience. We've been given these lives to experience. We've been given the wonderful people around us to experience. And it is so important to take moments to appreciate that, to just accept the joy that is in life, or that can be in life. Wendell Berry was once asked about the Amish, and he said that he was interested in the ability of the Amish to put their community first, and to ask of any proposed innovation, what will this do to our community? They're willing to ask that question in the most practical ways, which means that there is no distinction between their economy and their religion. In their daily work, they practice their faith. And most of us now, he said, can't be Amish, but some who aren't Amish have begun to ask Amish questions. And I love that idea. So to echo Barry, most of us now can't be transcendentalists. We actually can, as I said earlier, but how many want to be, I guess. But we can at least start asking transcendental questions. Questions that make us feel that we might be on the right path in relation to our communities, ourselves, our church, our synagogue, our government, whatever. To ask those questions that he asks in his writings. And one of the things I love reading in Thoreau are questions. He is always asking questions to himself, but also to his readers. When I put together the Quotable Thoreau that Victor so nicely praised, and I was trying to figure out how to organize all the thousands of quotations that are out there about Thoreau, or from Thoreau, I thought the best way to start it was with questions, because that's what he's always doing. And I find that when we look at a Thoreau question and we start thinking about it, it's a great way to reevaluate our lives. So I want to read you 8 quotations. I'm going to pause briefly between each of them so you can just think about them for a second. There's no quiz afterwards. You don't have to tell me your answers. It's just, but I find these just so challenging in many ways. What may a man do and not be ashamed of it? Who shall say what prospect life offers to another? Could a greater miracle take place than for us to look through each other's eyes for an instant? Why should we knock under and go with the stream? If the bell rings, why should we run? Why should we be in such desperate haste to succeed and in such desperate enterprises? Did ever a man try heroism, magnanimity, truth, sincerity, and find that there was no advantage in them? If a man constantly aspires, is he not elevated? So I like to use those questions as sort of bouncing off points for my life. For those who know me really well, they might think I am somewhat hypocritical, but we are all hypocritical. Thoreau was hypocritical. I mean, if you took what you think are Thoreauvian ideals and held them up against Henry David Thoreau, he's gonna fail. Because what he is writing about isn't Henry David Thoreau who walks around Concord. It's more an idealized persona. And so he's trying to inspire us, not tell you who he was. And it's so interesting because we look at so many parts of his life as so central and integral to who he was. I mean, it's very difficult to separate Walden from Thoreau. I mean, those two words are so together that it's hard to separate them. And we think about him almost as if he lived his entire life or wanted to live his entire life at Walden. But it's kind of interesting when you think about that the amount of time he lived at Walden Pond was 5% of his entire life. It's pretty little when you start thinking about it. That's a pretty small percentage for what's going on down there. And so, I talk to students all the time, talk to people all the time about why Thoreau went to Walden, and particularly why he left Walden Pond, and I would tell that story over and over again to students for a decade, and then one day, it struck me. So just one more quotation. You may rely on it that you have the best of me in my books, and that I am not worth seeing personally, the stuttering, blundering clodhopper that I am. Even poetry, is in one sense an infinite brag and exaggeration. Not that I do not stand in all that I have written, but what am I to the truth I feebly utter? So I started thinking about what is the truth and what is he uttering? and realized that that story that I've been telling about why he left Walden, and I'm sure most of you know, left Walden because Emerson was going off on a lecture tour to Europe, and Lydia wanted somebody to take care of her and the children and the house. Well, Emerson was gone, and Thoreau, of course, had lived with the family before, perfect choice. And so, yes, and Thoreau moved into the Emerson house. And then one time, I don't know what made me do this, I kind of looked at the timeline. And Emerson asked Thoreau if he would take care of the family while he's gone, about 5 weeks before he was sailing for Europe. And Thoreau did something that is incredibly significant and not in any biography you will read or probably ever read. He packed his bags and he moved into Emerson's house in Concord. Why would the man who was so associated with being at Walden Pond and who, according to anything you ever read, will tell you that, he can't live without his beloved Walden, why would he pack his bags and leave 5 weeks before he had to? I mean, if he needed to be at Walden Pond, he would have stayed there for 5 more weeks and gone to Emerson's house the day before Emerson sailed for Europe. But he didn't. And the reason, this is where I get these kind of mean looks from Thoreauvians, is being at Walden Pond wasn't that big a deal. What's the big deal for Thoreau is writing about an experience. It's not being at Walden Pond, it's not climbing Mount Katahdin, it's not doing anything, it's not the night in jail. Those things are really small and insignificant in his life. They become significant when Henry David Thoreau takes those experiences and turns them with his words into something that you can no longer separate out from his name. So that Walden becomes that thing in Thoreau's life that you can't imagine him ever living without. He never went back. He could have. Emerson still owned the property. I don't think Emerson would say, nope, you can't live there anymore. So why didn't he go back? Because he didn't need to. It wasn't important. And I'm telling you this because there's really no end to how we can look and interpret Thoreau and his writings and his life. And to quote, I don't do this very often, I'm going to quote T.S. Eliot. Most people will know that I never quote T.S. Eliot, but he said, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." And that, I find, is true with Thoreau, that we need to constantly reevaluate, rethink, even some of those things that we know really well. And so now I look at Walden a lot differently than I did 20, 30, or even 50 years ago. Thoreau quotation: "There are many things which we come very near questioning, but do not question." So I have found in my many, many years of writing and thinking about Thoreau that we don't tend to question the things we assume are factual or that we think we already know. And so when I do my work, I'm also always trying to reinterpret and think about things. But there are like lots of questions. There's always one more question in Thoreau studies. Thoreau's cellmate, which we read all the time about, how innocent he was and set free. Not true. Emerson's first wife grave, one time I had an intern and she asked me where Ellen Tucker Emerson's grave was because she wanted to put flowers on it. And I said, oh, she's in West Roxbury. And she said, no, like literally, where is Ellen buried? And I said, I'm not sure, I'll go look it up. So I went upstairs into the library and I'm looking it up in all these books and everything is she's in her father's tomb in West Roxbury. It's like, oh, that's not very helpful. So I reached out to some of the great Emerson scholars in the world and I said, hey, could you just tell me where Ellen is? West Roxbury, in her father's tomb. Great, that's really helpful. So I found out where her father's tomb was. Well, it turned out it was behind a school. And in those days, even in the late 19th century, at one point, they were going to turn over the graveyard for a playing field. Yep. And so try to figure out where did they move Ellen to. So we're trying to find out where Ellen is, and I again reached out to people. Nope, she's in the father's tomb. So I found this guy who was an expert in Massachusetts cemeteries. So I said, could you tell me where Ellen is? And he said, well, the graves were all turned over. People, they were advertised, you had the right to take your body and move it elsewhere. And he went, oh wait, she's in a tomb, not a grave. So start all over, where's the tomb? The tombs are all on the side, and there are pictures that the tombs are there, but in constructing the playing field, they still decided to get rid of the tombs. And eventually she was moved to Mount Auburn, but that question just told me how we don't actually go all the way with the questions. Here was what seemed a simple question, but we didn't know the answers. Who's buried in Thoreau's grave? That's my favorite one. So there's a picture, an archival picture by Hosmer, who did a lot of photographs of Thoreau country and things around Concord. And there's an actual photograph from the turn of the last century where Sophia is on one side and Henry's on the other. And most of the other pictures we have, it's reversed. It's not a mirror image, it's not a negative, it's an actual photograph which has Sophia on the other side of Henry. So the question then becomes, which grave is Henry in? Which one is Sophia in? And what happened? I don't know. I wish I knew. We will never know unless somebody wants to dig up the graves, which I don't think is ever going to happen, but things happen. Or just looking at, Thoreau's house, one of the most famous houses in American literature and history, Thoreau's house at Walden Pond. There's always one more question. Where was there a king post, which is a huge post in the middle of the house? It is described by one of Thoreau's contemporaries who had been in the house as being there, this huge, huge king post, and yet it's not in any replica you will ever see anywhere in this country, as if the king post didn't exist. But why? And why aren't people trying to figure out if the king post was there or not? Where's his closet? He had a closet in his house at Walden. Where was it? Not important questions, but they're questions. Why don't they nag people like they nag me? Or the question I get from the students all the time, where was his outhouse? Did he have an outhouse? We're talking about the man who watered wildflowers and squatted on Emerson's land. Did he really need an outhouse? Who knows? Or the myths that keep persisting because people don't question them. There's always one more question, such as, Emerson's visiting Thoreau during the night in jail, or that Thoreau's cellmate was innocent, or that Thoreau had asked permission to live at Flint's Pond. None of these are true. None of them ever happened, but these stories still persist. They're in most biographies. And it's not that they surface with people who don't know Thoreau very well. They have just a surface introduction. They are in works by very serious academic scholars, highly respected, who should know better than repeating these things without sort of checking to see where they came from. Sorry, shouldn't have got off on that little tangent, but I can't help it. Anyway, so getting back to the idea of not having regret, it's being grateful. It's being thankful. Thoreau said, I am grateful for what I am and have. My thanksgiving is perpetual. It is surprising how contented one can be with nothing definite, only a sense of existence. As Emerson said, I am thankful for small mercies. And Thoreau again, here or nowhere is our heaven. We don't want to keep looking forward to something afterwards. We want to appreciate what's here now. And just to wrap it up before we do some questions and answers, if you have any, there's a couple of passages from his journal that just feel like, almost like a prayer, and so this seems like an appropriate place to read these, but so I'm going to close with this from Thoreau. I am eager to report the glory of the universe. May I be worthy to do it. To have got through with regarding human values so as not to be distracted from regarding divine values. May I go to my slumbers as expecting to arise a new and more perfect day. May I so live and refine my life as fitting myself for a society ever higher than I actually enjoy. May I dare as I have never done. May I persevere as I have never done. May I purify myself anew as with fire and water, soul and body. May my melody not be wanting to the season. May I gird myself to be a hunter of the beautiful, that not escape me. Let me forever go in search of myself. Never for a moment think that I have found myself. Be as a stranger to myself, never familiar, seeking acquaintance still. Thank you. I don't know if anybody has any questions, or if you've all had enough, or what, or we're sleepy. I'm sleepy, so.
Is this working? Okay.
Yeah.
If you have a question, raise your hand, and I'll bring the mic to you.
Jeff, in the 1800s, Emerson was far more famous than Thoreau, as I understand it. I wasn't alive then.
Yes.
Today, it seems that Thoreau is far more famous than Emerson. There's been 2 U.S. postage stamps featuring the ugly face of Henry Thoreau, but brilliant mind, since World War II. No
Yeah.
postage stamps on Emerson. How do you explain how Henry has captured the imagination of even more people than Emerson,
Yeah.
it seems?
Yeah, no, that's Peter, that's a good observation, because it's so true. I mean, for almost 100 years after Thoreau's death, he was literally just a footnote to Emerson's studies. People read Emerson, they studied Emerson in college. Thoreau was not read in colleges until really the 1940s, 1950s, so almost 100 years since his time at Walden. I think one of the reasons, at least for me, is that, okay, we do these teacher seminars every year at Walden Woods Project, and what we find is that at the beginning of the time, we're talking about Thoreau, and at the end of the week, we're talking about Henry. And Henry has a way, see, I'm doing it. Thoreau has a way of making it seem like he's talking directly to you. So it's Henry talking to Peter, Henry talking to Jeff. Emerson's not like that. Emerson's up here in the pulpit. Emerson is inspiring. He's amazing. He's really important to me. But you never call him Waldo. So I think the relationship that readers have with those two authors is Emerson keeps his distance. And people who knew him, I mean, he's talked about as being somewhat cold and somewhat distant. Thoreau was more personal. I know people didn't always like him. Elizabeth Hoare said, "I love Henry, but do not like him." But there's still something in his writings that attach you deeply to who he was and what he had to say. If I could just do one little aside, many years ago, I was lucky enough to do the portable Thoreau for Penguin Books, and I was really happy to do that because I love Penguin Books and I love the portable series. So I did it, and when I was done, the editor said, "Oh, this is really nice. Do you want to do another one?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to do the portable Emerson." She said, "Nah, Emerson doesn't sell." So a couple of years later, she called me up and said, "We'd like to do another book with you. What would you like to do?" And I said, "I really want to do the portable Emerson." And she said, "Jeff, Emerson doesn't sell." So 2 more years passed, and she called me up and said, "We're thinking of doing a portable Emerson. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Sure, that's a good idea." And so I did the portable Emerson, and you know what? He doesn't sell. I get these ridiculously, these royalty statements, and the Thoreau. It's not like I'm never going to die rich from the portable Thoreau, but it sells copies every year, and the Emerson sells a copy or 2 every. It's amazing. People do not read Emerson anymore, which is a shame because Emerson is so powerful. And I just want to say one more thing about Emerson. It's to remember that what these writers wrote was designed most often to be said to people at a lyceum, from a pulpit. They're preaching at you. And one time I was giving a talk somewhere, and I was doing my normal stuff about me and things and blah, 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 and people being very polite. And then I had to read this passage from Emerson. And I started reading the passage out loud from Emerson, and the room literally got hushed. I mean, it was you could just feel the awe of his words and the power of his words when you read him out loud. So I recommend anybody here, if you're a little bit iffy about Emerson, pick up some Emerson, go off into a room, read him out loud, slowly, and it'll be incredible. So.
Do we have any question? Oh, here's a question over here.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Julia.
Sorry, I was late.
Oh,
because
I was gonna speak to you about that.
Working.
Oh, yeah.
So I just have, so I missed, I didn't know whether you talked about your translation.
I
The
didn't.
translation of your annotation, annotated Thoreau.
Yeah.
Because I just came bearing message, the second version of the book, the soft cover, has been reprinted for the 10th time.
Wow.
In Chinese.
Wow. So this is Julia, and she is the Chinese, I don't call her my Chinese translator, but she translated my edition of Walden, a fully annotated edition for China. And it's a beautifully published edition that she did. So thank you for that. And it's nice to know that it's still doing well over there. So
people are hearing Thoreau through your annotation.
it's nice. Thank you. I like that.
We have somebody in the chat who wants you to do a talk like this, but about Emerson.
Oh, all right. My life with Emerson.
Any other question back here? Okay.
Okay.
They're not going to hear you on. I'm quick.
Thank you for solid season. Oh. Can I ask you a question? I'm not really I'm not really clear about the follow-up.
About what? Sorry?
The follow-up between Mr. Thoreau and Mr. Hawthorne. And I have a follow-up question. And I will own this. I'm an Emersonian.
Yay, I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, in his grandfather's church. But I am appalled at Mr. Thoreau's dismissal of women, even though he seemed to have a really remarkable connection with his sisters and his mother. And so, do you have thoughts on that?
So wait, Thoreau's dismissal of...
Yeah, his misogynistic idea about women not being smart enough. Oh, just take the mic away. Can you speak to Mr. Thoreau's constant references to women not being smart enough to do this or that?
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Thank you.
So I actually get the question a lot about Thoreau being misogynistic, or was he misogynistic? And the answer is absolutely not. So the way I look at Henry David Thoreau was he was brilliant, and he did not want to waste his time with anyone who couldn't interact with his mind, didn't give him an intellectual challenge. So yeah, I know it's not the nicest way to describe him, but I think this is actually true. So for Thoreau, it didn't matter if you were male or female, black or white. It didn't matter if you were Native American or European descendant. If you had something to offer him intellectually, he's going to sit down and he's going to talk to you. But he clearly said, I don't understand why anybody would want to talk to a woman because she has regular features. So he's not going to talk to a woman just because she's a woman. He's going to talk to a woman like Mary Moody Emerson, who he loved talking to because she was brilliant. So it's unfortunate that the things he may have said about women where he may be somewhat derogatory is because most of the women in the mid-19th century were doing, women's stuff, which wasn't going to interest him. They're taking care of the home. They're doing their job that they need to do, that needs to be done. They're doing it well. They're taking care of their family. They're cooking and sewing and doing all of these things, but that is not going to stimulate Henry David Thoreau in his mind. So I don't think he's misogynistic. I think he's just extremely selective in who he wants to talk to. And that's just my interpretation. I mean, people are going to talk about it in various ways, but there was a piece about Thoreau in the New Yorker many years ago, which you all know, I'm sure. Yep. And when our teachers were here last summer, and I was talking about the journalist who wrote the piece, whose name for some reason just escapes me all of a sudden, Catherine Schultz, there we go. And I talked about her brilliance of manipulation, and that if she wrote a nice piece about Henry David Thoreau, nobody would ever read it. She wrote an extremely nasty piece about Henry David Thoreau for the New Yorker. And what happened? Every Thoreau enthusiast and scholar, myself included, wrote a reaction to it in a major publication. So all of a sudden, her name is everywhere. So what happened when she wrote this nasty piece about Henry David Thoreau? She got a job as a reporter for the New Yorker. Brilliant career move. Now, I told this story to our teachers, and one person accused me of being misogynistic. And I'm thinking, I never said anything about her in relation to her being a woman. I talked about her skills as a journalist and how she manipulated the thing. But, these labels get put upon people because people aren't thinking carefully about things. And so I think if you look at all the women that Thoreau praised or talked to, I think if you talk about various other people that Thoreau talked to, you'll see that he really wasn't, I don't think he was prejudiced or bigoted in any way. I think there are probably some people here who are shaking their heads a little bit. They may disagree with that, but yep. So for another discussion.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'd love to have that discussion.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. I'm very curious. So, I mean, I agree with you. So much of Thoreau's lasting message is in his writing, and he's so careful in his writing and in his published writing, which was very limited in his lifetime.
Yeah.
And he was absolutely furious with the unsolicited editorial change that occurred in one of his manuscripts in the Atlantic. But in his legacy, so much of the work that we're familiar with is not work that he himself prepared directly for publication or ever delivered publicly in his
Correct.
life. So I'm very curious what you mentioned something which I feel is so true, which is that it sounds when you're reading Henry Thoreau, it sounds like he's speaking to you. So who do you think his audience was? Was it, again, that he was always working towards his best self? And, how do you imagine that process? Was he always thinking maybe someone will publish this? Or, what do you take?
I mean, I think he had faith that he would be published, and he was being published in some really good journals and newspapers, the Tribune and various places. He had a lot of bad luck with his publishers, and things didn't always sell, and things happen. But considering that, he is putting together his essays on his deathbed for publication in the Atlantic Monthly, considering that he's getting books ready for publication, I think he had a lot of faith that people would eventually read his words. And I don't think it was a blind faith. I don't think it was just, I hope people are going to read this. I think he knew, because he knew he was going to be published in the Atlantic Monthly after he died, and that's a step towards fame. So,
We have another question here.
One question. What were the reasons for the falling out between Thoreau and Emerson?
yeah. So, this is one of those interesting things that the biographies don't tend to deal with. They deal with the falling out. When Thoreau's first book, A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, was being published, Emerson was pushing Thoreau towards publication before Thoreau thought it was ready. And it didn't do well. He had to buy the books back from the publisher. It cost him a lot. And he was disappointed that Emerson did not write a review of it or help promote it. Thoreau was wrong. So that's what Thoreau believed. Emerson did a lot to promote Thoreau's first book. He was writing to other editors, he's writing to various other people. He didn't think it would be helpful for Emerson to write a review of Thoreau, because they're friends, they're in Concord together, you need somebody else to write a review. And so Emerson is trying to get people to write reviews of a week. I don't think Thoreau ever knew what Emerson did on his behalf, because I don't think Emerson would have told him. But in doing my research for Solid Seasons, I found a lot that Emerson was doing to promote. So it was based on a misunderstanding. But what the biographies don't cover is the fact that you have these two men who have a profound love and respect for each other. And yes, they had a falling out, as every couple, if you want to use the word, has. We all have disputes with our spouses, our friends, whatever, and usually we are all mature enough to get beyond that and get to the next point, and they did. So shortly after the falling out, Emerson and Thoreau's friendship develops, and it's stronger, and they have a deep love and for themselves, for each other, and that friendship lasted until Thoreau's death and beyond in Emerson's case. So the reason I wrote the book Solid Seasons is based on one tiny anecdote that I just absolutely love, and that is when long after Thoreau had died, and this woman I can't remember who she was, she came to Concord to spend time with Emerson and learn about Emerson and spend 2 days with him. And all Emerson wanted to do was talk about Thoreau. But his mind is starting to go. He can't call things up, and I love this. So he called to Lydian in the next room and said, "What was the name of my best friend?" He used the term best friend. What was the name of my best friend? He knew it was Thoreau in his heart. His best friend, the person he loved most, was Henry David Thoreau. So that friendship was strong. I mean, it is one of the greatest literary friendships of all time. You think about the various literary friends that are out there, Emerson and Thoreau, that's one of them. And it bothers me that biographers don't pick up on how much their friendship developed and continued to develop. They are happy to talk about the fight, the falling out, and they leave it there as if these two men never reconciled, which is absolutely wrong. So, yeah, based on a misunderstanding, they got over it. Uh-oh.
Okay,
We don't have time for Richard.
So myths and misconceptions.
Yeah.
Mine is, I think that the chimney on the replica is wrong.
Oh, there we go, okay.
But is there one myth or misconception, I can't believe we've never talked about this, that you have that there's just something that he doesn't talk about or something that he doesn't say, or because we make huge mountains out of things that
Yeah.
I think are pretty unimportant in his life, like the Ellen Sewell nonsense and stuff like that. So is there one thing that you think?
Well, I mean, the outhouse is important if you have to go. So
Well, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Which is the number one question I always
I
get.
bet you do.
Yeah. So is there one big thing that you wish we could find an answer to?
Wow. Yeah, I don't know Richard, I don't know what the answer to that question is. There's so many questions I have, but, right, and they fluctuate a lot. But, no, no, that's such a good question. I wish I had an answer for it, because there are those moments when you want to know what really happened. And we'll never know about some of them. So, no, yeah, thank you, though.
You and I have said that before. If it's not in a journal,
Yep,
then it either wasn't important to him or it didn't happen.
right, exactly. I mean, it's like, I look at things like, the Flint's Pond thing, and everybody has heard the story about how Thoreau wanted to live at Flint's Pond before he wanted to live at Walden. And he asked Farmer Flint if he could live there, and Flint said, no, you can't, and Thoreau called him a skinflint in Walden. Thoreau never knew Farmer Flint. Thoreau never mentions Farmer Flint. Flint never mentions Thoreau. If you go through everything, there is literally nothing that puts these two men together. People have talked about, I mean, contemporaries of Thoreau talk about where Thoreau wanted to live. Other places besides Walden, Flint's Pond is never mentioned. If he ever wanted to live at Flint's Pond, he would have asked his friend Wheeler's family to live on Wheeler's property. That would make the most sense. Why would you go to this other farmer that you didn't know and say, hey, can I build a house on your property? I mean, it's idiotic. Thoreau never intended to go to Flint's Pond. So there's things like that where there's no way, it's like trying to prove a negative. It's just really hard to do. But there are questions like that that I really want to know about. So, yeah.
These are open-ended questions
They
that
are
we
open.
can continue to discuss at the reception downstairs, which will be downstairs through that door over there. But thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank all of you for coming out tonight. I want to invite you all to join the Transcendentalism Council of First Parish for our next event on Thursday, January 18th. Historian David S. Reynolds will be talking about, this is a Zoom lecture, Abraham Lincoln in Cultural Context, Puritans, Cavaliers, and Transcendentalists. We will send you out all a link. Everyone that has registered, we'll email you a link. And watch our social media for details, or pick up a flyer if you haven't already got one. We wish you and your loved ones a happy time as you celebrate your chosen midwinter holiday.